Hi everyone, this is Miss Kimmy. Today we're going to be going over the integumentary system and its pathologies in chapter 22. So, one of the most important things to note about the integumentary system is that the integumentary system contains the skin, and the skin is going to be the largest and heaviest organ. This is about 7% of our body weight. The skin is self-repairing and it's a protective barrier. What does that even mean, right? So if I, for instance, right, let me draw a little stick figure man, right? If I was just muscles and bones, any little germ or bug really can get into my body and potentially mess things up. And so my skin is going to act as a barrier against all of those potential pathogens. Now, it is also self-repairing. So what does that mean, right? For instance, if I have a cut on my skin itself will do its best to repair itself. That is a purpose of the integumentary system. Now, we also have, natural passageways or, openings, as what some people would call them, right? Openings, right? So that those are things like our lips, right? Our mouths, so that we can eat, our booty holes, so we can poop, other, urinary and reproductive organs, so that we can urinate and do other things. And of course, with the word dermatology, we know that suffix of ology is the study of, so derma must be about the integumentary system. Now, the basic anatomy of the integumentary system, of course, is the skin, hair, nails, and skin glands. The hair and the nails are going to be accessory, right? Accessory organs, right? I can accessorize with my hair or with my nails. Now, an accessory organ doesn't typically mean that, we don't need these things. No, like hair is a protective factor within the integumentary system. It helps me feel sensations, feel the breeze. However, right, hair and nails are things that we technically use. So, for instance, I can live without hair. I can live without nails, right? But my quality of life might be diminished. Now, I cannot live without my skin. I cannot live without my skin glands. So if I can't sweat or produce oil, sebum, right, I can't live a functional life. Now we're talking about a serious, very, very serious pathology. The physiology or the functions of the integumentary system include protection, as we just, discussed, immunity, right? What does that mean? It's protecting me. It's helping, it almost expose me to the world around me so that I get used to the world. And my skin will tell me what I'm used to and what I'm not used to. If I'm not used to it, if I don't like it, or not even that I don't like it, let's say I have no immunity towards it, then I'll break out into hives or dermatitis. Now, of course, absorption, right? We absorb things through our skin, whether that is vitamin D from the sun or absorbing things, meaning, I love lotions and I love serums and I love what that does for my skin. And I can actually absorb that through my skin, right? Of course, we can feel with our skin. Sensation is probably one of the most important functions of the integumentary system, because that is the function that we as massage therapists constantly do. We sense with our hands, we palpate. Our clients are sensing our massage. If we were not able to use that function, we wouldn't have a career. Right. Of course, we have temperature regulation. This is our integumentary system's ability to make us sweat when it is hot and make us, have goosebumps and shiver when it's cold. Excretions are, of course, in response to sebum production, which is that oily skin on your face, or, sweat when you're working out. And then we have vitamin D synthesis, which is our body's ability to absorb vitamin D, whether that's through the sun or through topical ointments or, whatever method you choose to do. But in this situation, we're talking about absorption through the skin. So we can utilize that for later causes, such as helping us out with bone production and hormone regulation. Our epidermis is that outer region, right? This is really what we know as skin, right? That's what we can see. And it's composed of epithelial tissue. It's relatively avascular. So what does that mean? Avascular, not vascular, right? So that tends to signify that there are blood vessels in this area, but not too many, right? These are going, what is in there are nutrients that are going to be provided by tissue fluids more so than official blood vessels in the epidermis, which is the most superficial layer of the skin. And it is derived from the ectoderm, which is an embryonic cell layer that also forms the brain, spinal cord, and special senses. So the same stuff that's being developed for your brain, spinal cord, and all the other senses, right, is what is helping form this region, that outer region of the skin, the epidermis, what we can see. Now, in epidermal cells, we have melanocytes, right? Melanocytes, if I just put melanin, right, that's melanin. And it produces, the pigmentation of our skin, right? It's stimulated by sunlight. So when we go outside and we catch a beautiful tan, for instance, that is melanin reacting, because why it's reacting this way is to create a shield against UV radiation. Of course, there are factors that are going to influence our melanin, right? I'm a Latina woman. My skin is very olive colored. My mom is olive colored. My father's olive colored, right? I don't burn as easily as, for instance, my best friend. She burns very easily. I do not, right? But my husband, for instance, he is a Dominican man and he is much darker than I am. So he'll tell me he doesn't need sunscreen. We all need sunscreen. Why? Because we need protection from UVB, UVA radiation. We need to make sure that we don't actually burn. And melanin can prevent us from burning. It just takes a longer time for people to burn. So the darker that you are, the more melanin that your skin has, typically can determine how much sunscreen you need to use. The fairer your skin is more sunscreen you're going to need to use, and regularly. Everyone should be using sunscreen regularly, even if you are of a darker skin complexion, because we can all burn. However, some people will be more susceptible to burning than others. And that is what melanin is doing, right? In the epidermal cells, we also have keratinocytes, right? This is produced in the stratum basal, which is the deepest layer of the epidermal layer, right? So remember, the skin has layers, right? There's layers to this. There's a bunch of layers, right? Somewhere over here where we have the dermis, up here is the epidermis, right? And we have layers to the layers, right? So the deepest layer of the epidermal layer is known as the stratum basal, or otherwise known as dermatium, right? These keratinocytes are going to be, kind of coming up through that epidermis. And so that skin that we exfoliate off of, or when we shower, we kind of, I pat dry, some people don't, but if you were to rub, you can see that skin. Those are dead keratinocytes. They already lived a long, prosperous life, and it is their time to go. Now, typically, keratinocytes die when they stop dividing and expire and receive fewer nutrients. This is part of what people call that cell turnover rate. If you go to a dermatologist and they tell you they want to kind of accelerate your turnover rate because maybe you have acne, for instance, what we're kind of pointing the finger towards in that situation are the keratinocytes, right? So a couple of important things to note about the keratinocytes is that they secrete keratin because there are vesicles inside of them, right? And that is the beautiful, beautiful keratin. And that keratin is a substance that's going to mix with skin oils and perform what is known as the water barrier or the epidermal water barrier. And that is to, it reduces water loss from our skin. So sometimes people who have or experience a lot of dryness in their skin, they tend to have problems with their keratinocytes. Now, way back when, it was a big trend to use keratin treatments on your hair, and knowing that keratin, of course, is supposed to be helpful in this water barrier, it was thought that this was going to be revolutionary because it's going to keep our hair nicely hydrated. Wasn't always the case for every hair type, but that is where that idea stemmed from, right? So cliff notes, right? Keratinocytes are in the deepest layer of the skin, of the epidermis, my bad. The keratinocytes are in the deepest layer of the epidermis, right? They are pushed upward. They secrete keratin. Keratin creates kind of like a waterproofing and prevents water loss. Here is, what desquamation is, right? This is when the epidermal cells are completely keratinized when they reach the skin surface, right? So by the time they reach the skin surface, they kind of did what they have to do, and they're creating this nice protective layer, and they're doing everything they can, but this is the end, right? Now, desquamate, the definition of it is the slowing off of keratinized or dead skin cells, right? So if you want to think about it like a shedding, that isn't necessarily too appropriate, but it does coincide with what we're talking about in this situation. Now, the rate of cell formation and desquamation is typically the same. Why? Because I can't just shed skin and then lose, like a pound of skin and not have a replacement layer. So this is a constant process because it's supposed to maintain the thickness of the skin. And this is going to take approximately 21 to 27 days over a lifetime. Now, of course, when you're younger, it's a little, the time is going to resemble more so 21 days. But as you age, that time, it's going to take you a little longer. So it's closer to those 27 days. Now, here are the cell layers, deep to superficial. So we already know that stratum basal, right there, that's an MBLEX question. We'll put an M next to that, right? Helps with skin cell production, and it is the deepest layer, right? Then we have stratum spinosum, right, which are, these little projections that come from a layer above. We have stratum granulosum, which are the keratinization, right? That's when we start getting those substances to help us with preventing water loss. We have stratum lucidum, which is translucent and it's present in thick skin. So for instance, when I look at my palms are of a different complexion than the rest of my body. You can look at your palms right now, it's a little bit translucent, and the reason why is because it's creating this kind of you want to think about like a conduction barrier almost, so that I can feel and move things very precisely with my hands, right? That's why I can feel some more sensations on my hands than, for instance, I can feel on my back. You can poke me with a small minuscule needle on my hand and I can tell you exactly where you poked me, but you do the same thing to our backs and it's not the same. Now, with the stratum corneum, this is a layer that is filled with horns, and this is where desquamation officially occurs. So here we can see the layers, right? For instance, we have the corpuscles. The corpuscles are going to help with things like sensations. We have that top layer, which is the epidermis, that middle layer, which is the dermis, and that lower layer, which is the hypodermis. Right here in the hypodermis, we're going to have more so connective tissue. Right, in the epidermis, we of course have the stratum layers, and then here is those beautiful sebaceous glands, and of course the hair follicle. Right, of course we have sediferous glands, which are our sweat glands. They're going to look a lot bigger than our sebaceous glands are in comparison, or at least they're going to look a little bit more complex. and we're going to have openings so that we can secrete sweat. Whereas for the sebaceous or the sebum, right, the sebaceous glands, it's going to go through the hair follicle, right, and it's going to secrete outwards to the hair. That's why we can have greasy hair. Here at the deepest layer, of course, we have stratum basal, right? Then we have stratum spinosum, where we can see, this is this nice little purple layer, stratum granulosum, which is the pink layer, stratum corneum, which is one of the most superficial layers. Now, over here, I want to point out, right, we have the epidermal dermal junction. This is a meeting point between two structures that is going to perform a purpose. It's important to know that word junction we're going to see repeatedly throughout the course, especially with the neuromuscular junction, which that is, the meeting point between what? The nerves and the muscle. Here, this is the meeting point between the epidermis and the dermis. And so there's going to be an exchange here. Here we have another corpuscle, which of course is going to help us deal with some things like sensation. Here's the erector pili muscle, which some people will say that it actually is helping keeping up the dermis, like structurally. Some people will say that. Not 100% sure on that, but it is a fun fact to look into if you're curious about it, right? But the erector pili muscle is going to be very helpful for hair integrity, and of course the production of goosebumps, the feelings of sensations, the ability to react. The erector pili muscle is a beautiful muscle. Of course, we have blood vessels, because any place that as you can see right here in the hypodermis is where the blood vessels are, and they're kind of extending all throughout the dermis, but then in the epidermis there is a lack of blood vessels, right? That's why it is called avascular. So you can see here in this epidermis that I do not have any veins or arteries, right? But it's still receiving a supply. Now, if I did have blood vessels reaching out here, if I were to get cut, that would be a very dangerous situation for me to be in. That is why the skin is structured in such a way. Here, we're talking a little bit more about the epidermal dermal junction. This is the region, of course, between the epidermis and the dermis, as we had just discussed. And it's going to provide epidermal support and nutrient exchange. So anytime you see that word junction, you want to think there's an exchange happening, whether that is a nerve impulse or, in this situation, a nutrient exchange. And they are connected to and separated by what? The basement membrane, right? The stratum basal is named as such because it adheres to the basement membrane, right, in this junction. So I'm going to go back just to, right, here is the stratum basal. The basement membrane would be like right there, right? And it's doing its best to kind of create this separation point, which is why we call it the epidermal dermal junction. But there is going to be a transference of nutrients in this region. In the dermis, right, this is a thicker inner region. Some people will call this true skin, and it's derived from the term mesoderm, including, embryonic cell layer that forms muscle and connective tissue. The biggest examples are, of course, collagen and elastin, right? Collagen is about 70% of the epidermis, of the dermis, my apologies. It supports nerves, blood vessels, hair follicles, muscles, and glands. Elastin gives us skin pliability and resilience. Of course, some people will say we lose collagen and elastin, and we do as we age. That's why we have a lot of products that marketed towards these aspects of our body. Now, with the dermal growth and repair, right, sometimes we do not, continue. It's not even sometimes, like we just don't continually shed and regenerate like cells in the epidermis, right? Like in the dermis, you're not constantly shedding. Why? Because the dermis isn't interacting with the outside world. The dermis, is protected by the epidermis. So for it to constantly shed is a little bit of a contradiction, right? But it can get injured. For instance, I have scars. I'm sure many of you guys do too. If you don't, someone who has a scar. And when you have a scar, right, typically that the dermis is what has been affected. You have penetrated through the epidermal layer and now you're going towards the dermal layer, right, or the dermis, right? And once you do that, that wound will create a scar over time. Now, when that happens, when you do have the wound, you're going to produce fibroblasts, right? And the fibroblasts are going to sew up that damage, right? And of course, depending on how superficial the injury was, the more likely you are to develop a scar, right? Why? Because it had to go very deep. And we're talking about like these fibroblasts are literally sewing this up together. They are, they're healers, but they're not miracle workers. You can't just not have a scar, right? If they're overstretched, right? Like, let's say, I gained some weight. Let's say this is how I was, and then this is what I become. Of course, to accommodate for that shape, my skin is going to stretch. And if I overstretch, right, I can, of course, those fibers, those elastic fibers, can tear and make a stretch mark occur, right? Because I went from this shape to this shape. Now, don't worry, all shapes are beautiful. Stretch marks are beautiful. They're beautiful lightning strikes on the body, right? But this is just another function in our dermal layer. Now, in the subcutaneous layer, this is deeper to the epidermis, but this has several names. When I was in school, I learned it as the hypodermis, and then, I have also heard of it as, like, some people call it the superficial fascia, right? Why? Because fascia is connective tissue, and we're still talking about, the integumentary system, which is a pretty superficial area. Why? Because it's covering everything else inside our body. So, for instance, my hypodermis, which is the deepest skin layer, is still more superficial than my deltoid muscle is. So that's why we do call it the superficial fascia, because we have connective tissue in this region. And not only do we have connective tissue, we are also, dealing with the fact that this system as a whole is very superficial. And when this layer extends inward, that's when it's called deep fascia. As massage therapists, we will be manipulating these two types of connective tissue. Now, this is going to anchor the skin to its underlying structures, and it's consisted of, loose connective tissue, adipose tissue, nerves, blood vessels, and that is what's going to keep, us sustained. And it's also where we're going to have, like, deviations present in the skin. So, for instance, my friends that are just like me who have cellulite, right, this is the layer. Skin color, of course, that can range. People come in all sorts of sizes, shapes, and colors, and this is going to range from almost black to nearly colorless when we're talking about, like, albinism, right? Now, albinism can be a genetic anomaly, right? Sometimes, you can just appear a different way. Why? Because genetically speaking, something happened. But what happened, right? What happened is your genes could have mutated. That is one possibility. You could have, maybe you did have a gene for albinism in your family and it was a recessive gene. There are several reasons why albinism can occur, right? So that's that nearly colorless. And then, almost black is a little bit more determined on your family's genetics, right? Now, of course, our skin color is going to be determined by our genetics, our physiology, our emotions, diseases, or disease processes, and our diets. If I choose not to eat any food and only drink water for now until maybe December, Miss Kimmy's skin complexion will not be the same. Why? Because my body will be focused on keeping my organs functioning. It cannot focus on bringing blood supply straight to the most superficial layers of my body. Right? Now, of course, physiology is the function. If you have something wrong with a function in your body, you can see it in the skin. Certain diseases will cause jaundiced skin, which is a yellowish complexion of the skin. Emotions, if you see that I'm very, distressed, you're going to tell. You can tell if I'm sad. Why? You look a little pale, you look a little sick, because I'm sad, right? Or if I'm angry, what happens when I'm angry, right? When I'm angry, right, my skin is going to start turning red. Why? Because all of my blood vessels are going to dilate and go straight to my face so I can think. If I'm shocked, right, if I'm very shocked, I not only am I concerned, right, but I can become pale from the fear or from the simply the shock of what just occurred. With skin color, of course, we have differences between us. Nobody's the same, and some distinguishable features is freckles, moles, age spots, which is, melanin very simply is just going to be concentrated in one or more area. Albinism is the inability to produce melanin. We already went over that. Vitiligo is partial or total loss of pigmentation. Winnie Harlow, she's a model. You can look her up. She has vitiligo. Hyperpigmentation can, of course, occur from pregnancy hormones. For instance, like hyperpigmentation looks like what some people would call sunspots, or what some people would call it's not even, we call sunspots to a lot of things. So be aware of that, because when we get into pathology, it's really important that you understand the difference between what is really a sunspot and what's not a sunspot. Now, hyperpigmentation is not technically a sunspot. It can be exacerbated if I'm, going out and exposing my skin to the sun, right? But this can also be due to things like hormones, right? Specifically pregnancy hormones, right? I can have the linea negra, which is the line between the navel and the pubic area. Melasma, which is a darkening of the facial skin. This is also known as the mask of pregnancy. Now, that carotene is going to contribute to a yellow skin pigment. Carotene is that color that is derived from carrots, right? Carotenes are actually really, really good for you. But this is different than jaundice, right? Jaundice is yellow skin from your inability to excrete bilirubin, right? So when you have a lot of we all have some degree of jaundice because we excrete bilirubin, but if you're having a problem with that excretion process, whether that's too much or too little, you are going to look yellow. Now, individuals who overeat carotene-rich vegetables such as carrots, peppers, that can also cause a yellowing of the skin. Hyperemia is red skin from vasodilation and increased blood flow, right? Hyper means, we're going up, right? Hyperdrive, we're doing a lot more. And emia is typically dealing with blood or blood flow, right? So here we can just know increased blood flow is that translation, right? Now this, we're talking about red skin from increased blood flow and vasodilation. Now, cyan is a color. It's typically blue, or cyan is a nice color. It's a blue or purple tinted skin. Pallor, P-A-L, pale skin. Right, now cyanosis or pallor can be caused from low oxygen in the blood, right? For instance, if when you think of someone suffocating and you think about the movies that we've seen, people start turning blue or pale, right? That is what we're talking about in this situation. Given it's not as intense as we see it in the movies. Of course, they have SFX and makeup, but in real life, it'll be a little bit more dull. But in serious, extreme situations, you will see those more vibrant colors of cyan. So cyanosis and pallor, of course, can be caused by low levels of oxygen in the blood. It can also be caused by embarrassment, right? So that's something to be aware of. I tend to turn red when I'm embarrassed, but that's just me and other people. Of course, fright, that shock we talked about earlier, can definitely make your skin turn pale. Anemia, we're talking more so about that cyanosis than that pale complexion. Raynaud's disease, which we saw in class the other day, where we saw an individual with several, their fingers were different colors. And then, of course, ischemia, this this word is going to show up a lot in the future. I highly recommend make a note about it, or at least at the very minimum make a mental note about it. And that is going to be decreased blood flow from vasoconstriction. Right? So what does the constriction mean? The hole is getting smaller. Right? That is what that means. And because, right, by arterial holes, or my vein holes, my blood vessels, right, is a little bit better, right, is getting smaller. Blood isn't going to be flowing properly. Hair is keratinized filaments. They arouse from of course, our hair follicles that we have in our dermis. And the shaft is going to protrude through a pore in the epidermis. That's how hair gets out. There are several functions to hair. Hair is a protective factor, right? It's going to protect us and our body orifices, and it's going to help us detect, breeze on our skin as well as movement. Now, white and gray hair, that is when we lose pigment on our hair. We have no pigment in our hair, and this can occur with age. A loss of hair now can be due to stress, chemotherapy, radiation, excessive vitamin A, and certain fungal diseases. Erector pili, right? That is the muscle that we just talked about briefly a little while ago, and it attaches to the hair. My apologies, to the hair follicles, right? And it's going to contract and pull the hair shaft up. That can, of course, happen when you're anxious or scary. Skin may dimple, causing goosebumps. Nails, those are also keratinized cells. They form hard plates on distal surfaces such as our fingers and toes. We can dig with them. They're good tools, and they're protective. They're protecting nerves in that area. And not only are they protecting nerves in that area, they also help us do things that we can use as a tool, for instance, for digging, scratching, and manipulating certain objects. There are different parts of the nails. We'll have the body, which is the largest part, the root, which is where the nail is being produced. The nail bed is the skin beneath the nail, right? And then the lateral nail folds are the sides of the nail. Cuticle is growing over the nail base. And then the lunula it's like a crescent white area in the nail base. Now, if you take shiatsu, there's like different analyses of the lunula and what the colors mean, right? Like if you have bright white in shiatsu, that's not a good sign, right? And of course we have free edge, which is the distal end. That's where I cut my nails, right? I cut my nails very short because I'm a massage therapist. Here we can see the anatomy all itself, right? The free edge, this is the part that I snip. The nail body's the biggest part. The lateral nail fold being kind of that skin that people chew on when they have a little hangnail, some people call it, right? Lunula looks like a moon, so luna, lunula. Cuticle is the skin over that lunula, and then the nail root is where it's coming from. With the skin glands, we have major skin glands. Like these are a big deal, right? We have sebaceous, pseudophorus, and ceruminous, right, or sera, right? So this is going to be responsible for earwax. Right, now pseudophorus is going to be responsible for sweat. And then sebaceous, sebum. Right, and they're going to create and secrete certain substances onto our skin surface via certain ducts that they have. Right, so for oil glands, that's connected to the hair follicle, and it's going to produce what is known as sebum. That is that oil we were talking about, and it's mildly antibacterial and antifungal. Why? We interact with the world around us, and this is a protective. When we say the integumentary is protective, this is one of the things. It's protecting us potentially from bacteria that can be harmful and fungi that can be harmful. So be aware that this is a function within the sebaceous gland. It also is going to have a lubricating effect upon our skin and hair. So, some people will be like, oh my God, my hair's so greasy, but their hair actually looks great, right? Why? Because it's lubricating the hair. The hair is not dry and brittle. Now, in other situations, especially with people, for instance, who have oily skin, be proud of your oily skin. You will age slower because of that lubrication aspect of sebum. Sedeferous glands or sweat glands, they produce sweat or perspiration. What's it going to do? Regulate body temperature mostly. But it's also going to eliminate wastes. We have like uric acid in our sweat, so be aware. Based off their secretion, location, and association with the nervous system, they can be classified as eccrine or as apocrine. With eccrine, this is a common MBLEX question. Eccrine is most numerous. Why? Because we just have it in more places. Apocrine, we're going to have it more like in intimate areas. But eccrine, we're going to have it pretty much all over the body. And it's going to secrete a watery-like perspiration, which is going to help us through evaporative cooling. Apocrine opens directly into the hair follicles, and it secretes a strong smelling perspiration. So when you're a teen, right, teen boys smell bad. That's a joke I like to say, but it's somewhat true, right? When you're a teen boy and you're just starting puberty, you're going to smell way worse than the grown man who has already sorted himself out with puberty. Right? Why? Because you're not used to it. You haven't figured out what deodorant works, and your hormones are literally going crazy at that moment. And so we know that the apocrine glands can be smelly, and we know that this person has just started experiencing puberty. So you want to think about it as like releasing the floodgates of puberty, right? That strong smelling perspiration is important to be aware. That is a hormonal factor. Right, that is me trying to attract a mate, in the biological senses. Of course, they're going to be located in the axilla, the anogenital region, then the breast, as well as the areola, right? And this, of course, happens during puberty. Here you can see the difference, right? That eccrine gland is going to have a coily look to it, and it's going to be a little bit bigger. Whereas that apocrine gland is going to have more of that jumbled look to it. And then here you can see, right, that sebaceous oil gland. Right, so we have the sebaceous oil gland and the apocrine gland working together. So not only in certain regions of your body are you sweaty, you are also oily. Mix it together, we have stinky. Right here we have the eccrine sweat gland, which is just sweat. There is no sebaceous gland next to it. Thermoregulation. This is maintaining a normal body temperature by balancing heat production and heat loss, right? Very simple, homeostasis. The skin is going to participate in this by dilating and constricting blood vessels, and this is due to inactivity and activity of the sweat glands. There are certain failures that can occur, of course, if I cannot regulate properly and it is very cold and I have no way to increase my body temperature, I will experience hypothermia. Hyperthermia, is an excessive increase in temperature. This is where I can be prone to experience something like a heat stroke. Here we can see thermoregulation, right, with the vasodilation, the vasoconstriction. And then we have skin receptors, right? Skin receptors, right? These are sensory neurons near the body surface, right? We have exteroreceptors, which are going to receive stimuli from where? External environment. That's why it's extero, right? Exteroreceptors. They are receiving signs, right? External environment is anything that's not inside you, right? So it is the world you are interacting with. You are getting stimuli from there, because it's near the body surface. And that stimuli is going to travel towards the postcentral gyrus, which is found in the brain, specifically the parietal lobe, right? So excuse my poor drawing of a brain, right? So we're pretending this is the brain right here, right? The parietal lobe is right here on the side. That's going to be parietal. So that is where the stimuli is going towards. And that is going to determine what did you just feel, right? So there's a way I can tell that there's a bug on me versus if what is touching my skin is a blanket. Now the homunculus is not my favorite thing in the world, which is a sensory space map, or this is map of the sensory space. And it's going to include things like your hands, your forearms, your face, your limbs, and 80% of it is post-central gyrus. So we're going to look at a picture right there eventually, and this is where it is, right? So post-central gyrus, right? So here's after the center of the brain is where you're going to find the homunculus, which is where, this part is going to receive impulses from your genitals, from your toes, and going forward. I think this homunculus is creepy, but it is helpful to understand that we have specific parts of the brain to deal with specific functions. So if something goes wrong with this area, I'm probably not going to tell what's going on in that part of my body. So if, for instance, let's say for my thumb right here, I have a problem. It's not lighting up when I get an MRI. I could maybe not move my thumb or maybe not feel my thumb, depending on the type of damage. We have free and encapsulated nerve endings, right? Free nerve endings have no covering. Why do they have no covering? They have no covering because they are ready to receive impulses, right? They want to receive energy and sense the world around them. This wouldn't be as functional if we did have coverings on them. That is why they're so commonly and wide distributed. Now, there's examples, for instance, nociceptors is my favorite. It's going to help you tell when things are being damaged, right? Nociceptors, I don't like pain. I say no to the pain, right? Nociceptors, right? And then, of course, we have Merkel discs and hair root plexuses, but I just wanted to make an extra note on nociceptors. Now, encapsulated nerve endings are, of course, covered by capsules, and they are going to change their shape, right? How are they going to do that? They receive stimulus mechanically to adjust to that. And those are known as mechanoreceptors. And we can see that in the corpuscles, right? Pretty much the corpuscles. So here is the Merkel tactile disc that's going to detect a light pressure or a light touch. How can we tell the difference? And they are a small receptive field, which is an area of skin receptors during sensation. They adapt very slowly, so they'll send information to the central nervous system for long periods. I use this to tell where I'm being touched and how I'm being touched specifically, right? That is what it is. That is why we call that specialized action as discriminative touch, right? So touch easily located on the skin. Now, for the nociceptor, this is going to detect noxious stimuli, which means there is damage, right? Whether that is tissue damage from temperature change or mechanical stimuli that's extreme or a chemical irritation, that is how I can tell. My nociceptor is telling me something is wrong, and it's going to serve as a protective function. It is bad not to feel pain. Why? Because pain tells me what to stay away from. It tells me what is going wrong. If I can't tell you what is going wrong, I can die. Now, of course, this rarely adapts, and it's the largest concentration found in the skin. Why can't we adapt to pain like this? Because we're not supposed to. The hair root plexus, right? This is like a branch of nerves, and it's going to detect mechanical stimuli, specifically hair movement, because it wraps around the hair follicles and kind of resembles like a small net or a web. It's also known as the hair follicle receptor. This is why electrolysis is painful, or laser hair removal is painful, or waxing is painful. We have the corpuscles. We're at Meissner's. Meissner's is also going to detect light pressure or touch, but it's going to help you feel textures as well, and a low frequency vibration. So pretty great, right? And it's a small receptive field. This does adapt very quickly to what the response is and adjusts to that. And it's located in the dermis, beneath the epidermal-dermal junction. It's abundant in hairless skins. You want to think fingertips, eyelids, nipples, genitals. These are very sensitive areas, not like how we were talking about earlier, where it's a little bit more generalized. These specifically are very, very sensitive areas. Here's Krauss Ruffini and Ruffini. These corpuscles are going to help detect deeper pressure, right? With Krauss, we have deep pressure, cold or reduced temperatures, low frequency vibrations and textural sensations. Whereas with Ruffini's corpuscle, we're talking about more of a continuous and persistent touch, skin stretching and warmth, right? So Kraus is a cold dude, right? Ruffini is nice and warm, right? He is a deep man, able to talk about his feelings. Kraus, not so much, right? I just want to try to make this easy to remember. Right now, with Ruffini's corpuscle, they adapt a little bit slower, and it's helpful for feedback when it comes to specifically gripping objects and controlling finger position and movement, and it inhibits a little bit of the sympathetic activity. With Passini's corpuscle, that's going to detect deeper pressures, high frequency vibrations, and stretching. It's a wide receptive field, and it adapts very quickly. Found in the dermis, specifically in the hands and the feet, especially as the joint capsules. Here are the pathologies you should be aware of. You can use the PowerPoint discussion that I had sent earlier in the chat. These are helpful, right? It's important to know the difference between contagious and non-contagious. So please remember what I said, right? Here, of course, we have, right, things like impetigo. Impetigo is going to be it's going to be contagious. These, right, decubitus ulcers are bed sores. We have cold sores, which is more HSV, herpes, and then fever blisters. We can have bruises and burns, and we need to know the difference. Boils can be due to a staph infection or due to a strep infection. Athlete's foot is fungal. All right, and acne is crazy because acne can be fungal. It can also be bacterial-wise, and it can just be. Here are some more pathologies, white warts, stretch marks. Stretch marks, I feel like, aren't really a pathology, but, it does change the appearance of the skin. That's why it's there. Seborrheic dermatitis or seborrheic keratosis, shingles, warts, right? So I'm going to put a C for contagious, right? Lice is contagious. Shingles are contagious. Some warts, specifically HPV, very contagious. Scabies is contagious. Ringworm is a type of fungal infection and it's contagious. Lice is parasitic, right? Scabies can be parasitic, right? Ringworm is fungal. Warts can be fungal, right? Now, NC means non-contagious. Psoriasis, someone can have psoriasis and not be contagious. People can have scars and not be contagious. So same with seborrheic keratosis, and same with stretch marks. That is the ending of this presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I loved making it, and thank you